Welcome to the One Question Leadership Podcast. This is Devin Crosby of Lynn University. Leadership is a dynamic occupation that requires vision, excellence, but most importantly, the humility to serve your people on a daily basis. As you lead, make sure to become grounded in something greater than yourself. This will shape your decisions, provide clarity to your team, and cultivate trust. And trust is the foundation of success. Enjoy the podcast.
Greetings, this is Ty Brown and welcome to the One Question Leadership Podcast, where we highlight executive and organizational leadership. Be sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram at 1Q Leadership. Our guest today is Jessica Palo. She is the Associate Athletics Director for Enrichment Services at Columbia University. Greetings, Jessica. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Now, you've been in this position for roughly 10 years, and obviously 10 years is a long time for somebody to put their stamp on something and to grow it to where it is now. But I wonder how it was when you initially arrived at Columbia, and talk to me how you've gotten to the Enrichment Services Department to where it is now from when you first arrived there at Columbia.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm actually asked to speak a lot about how we have grown and evolved over the last several years. And when I speak about, where we are now, I always start by highlighting that Columbia Athletics has a rich history of student athlete support. And this foundation of student athlete support was led by Jacqueline Blackett, her Senior Associate for Athletics, Physical Education and Recreation, and Senior Women Administrator. And I really believe that because of Jackie's work, we have been able to evolve into what we are today. Over the last several years, our team has grown significantly. Our team now includes 7 full-time professionals who provide support services in academic support, sports psychology, mental health counseling, sports nutrition, career development, and well-being and leadership. And well-being and leadership is the most recent student-athlete support service that was added to Success Through Wellbeing. It was added in November of 2018. And we added that position because Peter Pilling, our athletics director, felt strongly about creating this role. And it was first to add an additional Columbia Athletics mental health support role to our team. So now we have 2 full-time administrators who can work with student athletes in this area. And the second role of this position was to create a department leadership program, which we are incredibly excited about. And Kate Miller is our well-being and leadership coordinator, and she's doing an incredible job developing this program for our student athletes. But one of the other areas that I believe is directly connected to the growth of our program and how we have developed into who we are today was that we centralized our support services. So naturally, as time went on from when I started to now, as I mentioned, different roles were developed. And these roles were working all under the same umbrella of supporting our student athletes. And we felt as things started to grow, we really wanted to centralize these support services. And why I think that was important for us is because it got everybody to the table. It put us all around the same space, and we started having dialogue and conversations about student athlete support, but we started seeing them also through different lenses. And one of the examples that I like to give is just a very simple example of when we started thinking about academic study spaces. And my mind, when I think from an academics perspective of an academic study space, I think of a space that's quiet. I think of a space that has room for small discussions. I think of a space for tutors, making sure that the hours are accessible for student athletes in the morning and in the evening. But when we start having this conversation and our nutritionist is in the room, she sees it from a different perspective as well. So she is now providing suggestions about providing nutritional education for the student athletes, how nutrition can be connected to memory and academic performance. If I'm having a conversation about academic difficulty, and for a specific student or for a group of students, I can bring this conversation to the group. I can have a discussion about different motivational strategies. I can have a conversation about what type of language I can use from a mental health perspective with students. I can connect our students that are struggling maybe with managing stress for exams and I can put them, I can connect them with a colleague and really provide that support for them to help them better prepare for exams, not just from a tutoring perspective or studying perspective, but from a mental health perspective. Real tools, real strategies that students can use to help manage that stress prior to an exam.
Yeah, this is interesting. And I might ask a few more questions to kind of unpack it a little bit. So the terminology you use is success through well-being. And I guess your title is enrichment services. Maybe this is a question for the group, right? It seems like this is evolving somewhere past where it is now, right? In terms of exactly what is going on in the department. But it also sounds like has been an excellent step in the direction of providing excellent experience and just making sure the health and well-being of the student athletes are being met where they are. I think it's great. There are a number of people in the room when you talk about having these discussions. Is there a reporting chain, I guess, in terms of are you supervising some of the people? And you mentioned there was another aspect of it, of another person in the department who has come in, and are they supervising people? Or tell me about the aspect of I don't know if it's like who's doing the evaluation of the people and specifically their departments, when it comes to what they're doing.
Sure. Yeah. So the co-director of Success Through Wellbeing is Dr. Brent Walker. He's our Associate Athletics Director for Championship Performance. And Brent really focuses on, the sports psychology piece that I spoke about, the mental health piece that I spoke about, also sports nutrition. So Brent oversees the specific areas of sports psychology and mental health, sports nutrition, and the well-being and leadership roles. My side, I oversee the academic support, our tutoring program, career development, and just the overall general well-being. So in terms of the reporting structure, that's how it would work in terms of Brent's space and my space. And then we all, come together and we create this Success Through Wellbeing team. But that's in terms of the structure, that is how it would work, or how it works.
Yeah, so this is interesting. When you talk about having a conversation about a student athlete or a group of student athletes, have you seen where something that applied to one student athlete after having a discussion actually probably helped out either a whole squad, team, or all the student athletes in general in terms of what you guys provide through this Success Through Wellbeing program?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you definitely see similar themes come up when we're in a room having a discussion. And I definitely think that, I have learned a tremendous amount from the conversations about, if we, for instance, if we're having a conversation most recently because of the timing of the year, just about our first years and that first year transition. And making reference to maybe some of the areas that I see incoming students needing specific support. And then, you can start seeing some head nods around the room. Yes, I'm also seeing that. I'm seeing that in the career development space, or I'm seeing that in the sports nutrition space. And you start seeing a thread, not always. I mean, there's definitely areas that students may not struggle in a particular area that they're doing well in, and another area of ours that they need more help in. I think that's normal. But in terms of themes, or in terms of areas of support potentially, or themes of support that we might want to focus on, absolutely. And that, to me, again, we talk about that centralization, you start looking at a specific area through different lenses. And you start seeing like how we can, tie in some of the same, when we talk about this resilient mindset. And that was one of the focuses as well of our Success Through Wellbeing program, was to help student athletes manage stress that they were facing, but also to help them build this resilient mindset and to help them focus on building this mindset in not only athletics, absolutely athletics. We want them to perform, we want them to do well, but also in the classroom and also in their personal lives, in their professional lives. So I think when we talk about building these skill sets, the goal is success, of course, while they're here, but also preparing them for success afterwards.
Right. Thinking about the holistic approach. I wonder if anyone from this area, Success Through Wellbeing, the connections to campus and making sure student athletes feel like more than just an athlete, right? More than just going to class and coming to practice and going to meetings. Like, talk to me about the engagement with campus that you are trying to provide or do provide for student athletes through the Success Through Wellbeing area.
I'm so glad that you brought that up, because for us, and it's a conversation we have often, we are not trying to silo ourselves or our student athletes from the university. Our university is incredible. The resources that student athletes have on campus, it would never be to disconnect that. It's actually the opposite. It's the bridge, right? We see ourselves as the bridge. We see ourselves as partners with our campus community, highlighting the resources and the support that they provide, emphasizing that support, reiterating that support to our student athletes. So we work, it is an intention of ours to build those relationships. And this goes back to, as I mentioned about, Jacqueline Blackett, when I said it in the beginning, that was one of the first things she mentioned to me when I started in my position, the importance of campus relationships. And I mean, I consider myself incredibly blessed to work with such amazing people. Our campus partners are incredible. And, again, it's about building that bridge, building relationships with our career centers, building our relationships with our academic advising deans, building a relationship, even our sports nutritionist has a relationship with the dietitian on campus. So it's all about relationships, because essentially we're all in the same game here. We're all trying to help support our student athletes. It's not to silo or to disconnect them from the campus community. It's the opposite. It's to connect them. It's to provide, opportunities for student athletes to understand what resources also exist. We have a weekly email that goes out to our student athletes about different resources, different opportunities that we come across, programs, internships, et cetera. And one of the things that we always do is we always try to pull in information from our campus partners, anything that we can share with them that they may be helpful for them. So absolutely, the success, that we have had as well has absolutely been a contribution of that success has absolutely been the partners and the relationships that we have on campus.
Right, which is necessary. So, of course, you guys, like the rest of us, found yourselves having to operate in a virtual environment. And I imagine the people that you talked about in the room, right, in addition to the rest of athletics, in addition to leadership from Peter Pilling, but specifically the Success Through Wellbeing area that you're the co-director of, I imagine you guys had to have a number of conversations to be able to transition the services you provided for student athletes into a virtual environment, and then also ensuring that they are effectively being received, how you are delivering them, to know if you had to make any adjustments to delivering these services. Talk to me a little bit about that transition, about ensuring the effectiveness of delivering those services, and just how that whole discussion is working there at Columbia with the area where you are.
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, I think my heart goes out to anyone in this role across the country, our coaches, administration, professors, student athletes, our families. I mean, this has been an absolute, difficult time, I think, for, more obviously for some than others, but just as a collective group, I think this was a time that we all really needed to unite and focus on how to best support our student athletes. And our primary concern was the mental health and well-being of our student athletes. We were concerned about this shift in student athletes' surroundings that may trigger stress. We were concerned about isolation, lack of connectivity. Student athletes, just taking it back to when all of this started evolving, they lost their athletic seasons. Student athletes were required to relocate off campus. Some could not depart campus, so some had to stay on campus. So student athlete support services now included support for relocating, storing belongings, having proper technology support for their academics, dealing with personal and family situations due to the pandemic, food insecurity, very personalized needs. So we really just sat down and said, how, first of all, what is student athlete support services right now? Second, how are we going to be effective in delivering these services to our student athletes? And we just decided the number one thing we needed to do was to communicate with them individually. We needed to speak with them over the phone, texting, emailing, speaking with family, speaking with coaches, basically however it was best for them to receive this information. And we asked them, like, what do you need? How can we help support you through this process? So we decided as a group that, I think if we were looking at themes, one of the main themes that we thought about was about how we were going to still maintain and build relationships with student athletes. How are they going to know who we are? How are we going to build relationships with them so that we can still create these spaces where they feel safe coming to? Additionally, we wanted to maintain our programming. We have spaces. We wanted to make sure we had spaces for our student athletes to connect with each other, for Columbia athletics community to connect with each other. We wanted to provide programs and opportunities for them to develop important skills, career development skills, for example. We needed to celebrate our student athletes. So all of the traditional programming, it looked different. Our first year transition program looked different, but we felt it was still important to support our incoming student athletes as they transitioned into college. The one other program I would highlight would just be our industry night. And we moved that to a virtual space this year, and it looked different, but we still had great participation, and we felt strongly that when we talk again about maintaining programming, that was a program that was important. Students needed to still have the skill set of developing a resume and a cover letter and get comfortable speaking with alumni and employers in that process. And we've been trying to jump on as many team calls as we can to just, again, get ourselves in front of the student athletes, let them know that we're here to support them, and just share our contact information like repeatedly, like on repeat, if they need to reach out to us for anything.
Yeah, it's interesting because when you talk about effectiveness and knowing if you are successful in what you're delivering, when you talk about the COVID era of current American history, I mean, it's almost like, well, I'm not a parent, but what you hear about parents is they're trying to figure it out until it's figured out, right? So you transition, you do things. If people are interacting, you assume it's successful. But I wonder, on a small scale, how do you know what you're doing virtually is successful? And then on a bigger scale, which would be the final question, is like in terms of when you and Peter sit down and talk about success at what you are at Columbia to do, how does that conversation go in terms of evaluating what you do? So I guess there's two different questions there, right? The effectiveness of the virtual transition, and then in general, evaluate your success leading the department where you are.
And important questions, very important questions, and questions that we have conversations about often. When we started Success Through Wellbeing, this was a conversation that we discussed at length. And I think to answer your first part of your question, I don't know if I would say that the quantitative measurements that we identified to evaluate our success in our individual areas, I think those have remained the same in terms of I feel confident that we will continue to evaluate those in terms of, if I give an example of academics, like academic performance or graduation rates or career development, in terms of number of student athletes that confirm postgraduate plans. So each of our specific areas have quantitative data that we're collecting and that we're looking at in terms of assessment. And we also have an end of year survey with our student athletes that we all read and look at and take time to make sure that the right questions are being asked to just understand the student athlete experience and their evaluation of us as well.
And I imagine that the tough part about that is, are they responding? And if they are responding, is it a priority to them to tell you exactly what's going on in terms of where they are on that progress of searching for jobs, or if I do need help for jobs, or do I have it figured out on my own? That's always tough.
Yeah, I'm glad that you asked that as well. Yeah. Yes. And I think so, to that point, we are also constantly monitoring utilization. So, and awareness of our support. And when I say that, we're looking at attendance at programs, and so for instance, at our industry night, we're looking at how many student athletes attended, what class years of their student athletes that attended, we're looking at open rates of our emails in terms of like, are students even opening our emails? It'd be great that we emailed you, but are you opening your email?
And clicking the links that are in it.
Yeah, and clicking and clicking the links, exactly. And I think you're looking at, the same thing with the text messages. Like the system allows us to look at like how many students are reading these text messages and opening the text messages. And it's trying to just get a sense of like, what's the best time to reach you. And and reiterating that when we're speaking with student athletes, hey, did you get this email? And if they didn't, then to be able to forward it to them, or to be able to repeat that information to them in real time. So I think we talk about like different ways of communicating with students. So the idea is that hopefully students are receiving the communication, whether it be through email or text or personal communication with students. We have a weekly coaches call with our head coaches, and we're also at that moment reiterating any important deadlines, resources, timelines that are coming up to ask our coaches to highlight this information to student athletes.
Yeah, so it sounds like in terms of evaluating the effectiveness of the virtual environment and evaluating the success of leading the department is they're both kind of similar, right? So when you sit down and talk to Peter, you talk about some of the same things, right? We've done this, this is our engagement rate, these are the things we've done. I wonder about the conversation when you talk to when you evaluate your role in terms of leadership, right? There's one thing to evaluate what your department or what the area you are over is done, but there's also another thing when you talk about the people you lead. Talk to me a little bit about that aspect that you do in terms of leading people, and how either the person you report to evaluate your leadership style, or even just interpersonally, introspective leadership. How do you evaluate your leadership when you talk about leading the other people that you work with and work for?
I love that question. It's something that I work on often. I think for me personally, I've had great examples of leadership, personally in my personal mentors, but also just professionally. As I mentioned, I started off the conversation with Jacqueline Blackett, being able to see her leadership, not only with student athletes, but within our department, to be able to see Peter's leadership, to have Peter walk over with me to a student athlete who is not feeling well, to check in on them, or to text the student athlete when they've succeeded, to celebrate their success, is important for me to witness in terms of the student athlete standpoint when we talk about student athlete support. But he's also doing the same thing for our staff, right? He's also reaching out if to celebrate something specific with a staff member, or he's also reaching out if someone's not feeling well. Hey, just letting you know I'm thinking of you. So these are examples, and they're important examples, I think, especially when you start talking about your own leadership and how you lead your team. So I think number one, I would say, is I've been very fortunate to have great examples of leadership. For me personally, I'm definitely in the service mindset when it comes to leadership. I believe that it's important to know our team, to know the people. I mean, as I mentioned this when we talked about our campus partnerships, I mean, we're all in this together, right? We're former athletes ourselves. So I think we all see ourselves as a part of this team, as a part of a team that is working to support the good and the health and the well-being of our student athletes. So I want to know what motivates my team. Like, I want to know what's important to them and what motivates them, because I care about them, but also because then they're going to give that to the student athletes, and it's sort of that overflowing piece, right? Where when you are feeling fulfilled, you naturally are also going to be overflowing that fulfillment out, and hopefully to our student athletes, in terms of supporting them and being interested in their lives. And I hope to set that same example that I explained, what I have witnessed and what I have received within our department. I hope to then model that example with our team.
Right. Understanding who you work with, who you work for, and what makes them tick. And they also understand you, right? So
Absolutely.
Then you can provide whatever service you need to provide for them, either personal or professional, which makes everybody around you, the whole community, great. Jessica, this has been an excellent conversation. I really appreciate you joining us here on the One Question Leadership Podcast.
Thank you for having me. I've enjoyed our conversation as well.
That was Jessica Palo. She is the Associate Athletics Director for Enrichment Services at Columbia University. And of course, this is Ty Brown with One Question. And keep in mind, The role of a leader is to create and maintain an environment that people want to be a part of. And as always, be better tomorrow than you are today. This episode of the One Question Leadership Podcast is produced by Spades Media Group, solving problems using creative leadership.